All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Hive Live. I'm your host, Alex Netty, and joining me today is my co-host, Andrew Bradley. Hopefully, you've been following all of our great approachable cybersecurity content on our social media channels, but if you haven't, you can find us on all the major channels using our hashtag or our username @HiveSystems. So make sure to give us a follow to stay up to date on the latest cybersecurity news. Today, we're talking about a topic, though, that will have a profound effect on every company that works with the Department of Defense. It's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. With the recent release of version 2.0 and soon maybe 2.1, it appears the program is actually finally getting some legs under it and marching towards mandatory compliance for everyone that operates in the defense industrial base. So what does that mean for your company? How will it impact the way you do business? And how will you meet the cybersecurity requirements it lays out without breaking the bank? Today, we're talking about all of that and ultimately how to work with the federal government. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for having me on, as usual.
All right. First logical place, I guess, for us to start is maybe a little bit of historical perspective, and that was the release of CMMC 1.0. That came out a few years ago now, and they've kind of been trying to figure out what it looks like, what the program is going to mean, and I think they were trying to take some ideas from other federal programs like FISMA and FedRAMP and kind of work through it. Maybe let's start there and talk a little bit about it. I'll pull up a graphic here that kind of shows some of the levels there as we dive into this.
Yeah, I mean, so basically it started off, it got kicked off and it stumbled a little bit out of the gate. A lot of the guidance that had come out was really high level. There was still a lot of work in progress things going on behind the scenes with developing the control requirements and the levels that are associated with the maturity rankings. And it was just very confusing for the defense industrial base and contractors looking to work with the DoD and store CUI or FCI. So immediately
CUI
there was
being controlled unclassified
information.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and federal contract information as well. The defense industrial base kind of pushed back a little bit because there was a lot of unclear guidance, and it was it was something that was in the rulemaking process and was finding its way into contracts. There was a couple of pilot programs that were ongoing, and the feedback generally for CMMC 1.0 wasn't that great. So initially, to start, there were five maturity levels associated with CMMC 1.0, and what basically dictated what level you had to authorize at was supposed to be part of your contracting terms, part of the award details. And a lot of times the organization within DoD that was procuring services wasn't clear up front especially in those pilot programs what level needed to be achieved. And then there was a lot of questions about what sort of security controls and implementations were required under each level. There were these two transition levels, and they had different assessment requirements, and it was a little bit confusing. And people just kind of, they were like, hey, let's press pause on this, reevaluate, and then come back with something that our base is okay with, and also is clear from the get-go. So
Let's
that's
talk
kind
a
of
little bit
like
about maybe some of the reasons that it failed. I love a good failure story because it ultimately means, how can things get better?
Yeah.
The first one that comes to mind is the federal government loves a three-tier system, both through the FISMA initiatives and everything that's come out through FIPS 199 and 200, but then also through the FedRAMP. They've always focused, and all the documents too, with NIST 853, they've always focused on a low, moderate, and high approach, a three-tier system. Yep. So here they were rolling out a five-tier system with these weird transition levels in between. Yeah, I don't even looking at this and thinking back to how I would implement it if I was in the defense industrial base. Honestly, I would be baffled. It doesn't make any sense. There's kind of these middle grounds where there's no assessment and no accountability, but you're moving between. The idea was flawed, I think, from the start.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the pushback came from. So there were in the pilot programs and the initial sets of contracts where this language was included, um, kind of post that rulemaking phase. There was just like a lot of hesitancy because there wasn't clear guidance on what set of controls, what baseline of controls needed to be applied at what level, what assessment, what type of assessment was required at each level. And in the case of 1.0, it was a blanket third-party assessment unless you're in one of these transition levels, and people didn't quite understand what landed them in a transition, like a transitionary state, one of the transition levels versus one of the foundational, the core levels of 1, 3, and 5 versus 2 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that stuff manifested in frustration on the side of industry, and it found its way back to DoD pretty quickly, and they realized they needed to reassess really quick.
I think too, one of the other areas that failed in was there was already some requirements for those in the defense industrial base to meet, right? We had NIST 800-171, and so now we're coming out with a whole other program, and for those companies, including smaller companies, right? Remember that the defense industrial base isn't just the Raytheons and the Northrop Grummans of the world. There are small mom and pop shops and manufacturing facilities, here in the continental U.S. that are making, bolts for fighter jets or specific, gears or other things that are part of larger programs. But ultimately, they're not always gigantic companies with tons of money. And so for the smaller companies, they may have already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to be compliant and build up a cybersecurity program they may not have already had. And here comes the DoD kind of yanking the rug out underneath them and saying, actually, yeah, we've got some additional things you need to do. And it's, fair to say that maybe those adjustments meet the threat models that exist today in the cybersecurity space. But I think it was tough just from that alone. I think that was the hard part, was they were just thinking a little bit selfishly about what needed to be done from a cybersecurity perspective, but not thinking about what that impact was going to be.
Right. And one of the things the DoD tried to accomplish was standardizing the sets of controls and requirements that they were imposing on contractors, especially through DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition and Regulation Supplement. So initially,
good job remembering that, because
yeah,
I could not have
honestly,
hit that.
I looked it up just before we started, so I cheated a little bit. The Before CMMC, there was kind of like a blanket cybersecurity requirement in DFARS, and most of the contractors that were awarded contracts under for the Department of Defense were applying NIST 800-171. So 800-171 became kind of the basis for CMMC once you get past that level 1 or the low level of control. And so a lot of contractors were kind of annoyed, honestly, because they had gone through and they had made themselves compliant with 800-171, but then they realized that they didn't necessarily need that level of control, especially if they were a level 1 system under the CMMC 1.0 model. So some of them were a little bit frustrated because the guidance coming out for the 17 control families, or 17 controls and areas that were part of the initial practices for that low baseline for the level 1, they weren't mapped really well to 800-171. So companies couldn't, demonstrate. They were a little bit annoyed that they couldn't map directly back to 171 the work they had done previously and easily be able to demonstrate the practices in place to the third-party assessment organizations that come in. So that was another reason why some of the pushback came from the industry in the defense industrial base there. But I think the DoD got that message, and they very, as quickly as it came out, it went away. It went back into rulemaking and back into reassessment. And so then we ended up with 2.0 here.
And that's a good point. By the way, we've been talking a lot about NIST 800-171. I just pushed out a link there in the chat for the link to the latest version of that as well. So you have a copy as we've been talking through that.
Yep.
That's exactly right. And that took us over to 2.0. Definitely some improvements from that side, but a little bit change in the overall framework and how we approach it, both from the cybersecurity side, but also those working in the defense industrial base.
Yeah. I mean, right off the bat, the first thing you notice about 2.0 is they got rid of those weird transitory levels, the transitionary levels. They just went back to that 3, that kind of like, triplets approach that they have for everything. So they've got the level 1, which is the foundational level. Level 2 is advanced, and then level 3 is your expert level. and they really did come out and clarify the controls and the requirements associated with each of those areas. So if you think about it, they really just did away with levels 2 and level 4 of the 1.0 framework, and kind of just retained the 2, 3, and 5, or the 1, 3, and 5 of that prior one. The requirements didn't change that much, but there was definitely a lot of clarification. I will say that it's still a work in progress. It's not fully through the rulemaking process yet. And once it's been fully codified, especially the level 3 baseline basically hasn't been fully developed and scoped. So if you go to like CMMC's website, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit, they don't actually have the actual requirements and controls scoped yet for that level. So if you go there for level 2 or level 1, they've got a scoping document and they've got some baseline matrices available for you to kind of inform your decision making and your control implementation reviews, but they don't have that for level 3 just yet.
Yep.
Still a work in progress. Yep.
And I think that's definitely something to point out here too, is looking into, as they've kind of grown and changed these requirements, probably the vast majority, and this is generally how a lot of these federal programs work, they try to usually put them right in the middle ground.
Yeah.
Probably 70 to 80% of companies fall generally in that moderate level under FedRAMP or FISMA. Most likely here, that's probably about where most companies are going to sit, is in that level 2. A couple that do smaller things maybe fall in the level 1, but probably not many. So if you're a company that's starting to look ahead to CMMC 2.0, you're probably falling in that middle ground. So start thinking about that. There's a good chance too, since those practices are aligned with 800-171, that you may already be meeting that, which is helpful. Probably not as many companies are falling in that level 3. That's probably a lot of national security level information, fighter jets, rocket ships, all the good stuff that we want protected as U.S. citizens and our taxpayer dollars. Probably maybe only 5 to 10% of companies may fall in that.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at DoD RMF, it'd probably be something categorized as a DoD high, so something along those lines. National security implications, defense, missile programs, things like that. The one thing is that so when you start talking about level 3, that's where they're bringing in the more recently released 800-172, and I think that's why it's taking a little bit longer for them to settle on the controls, because they're selecting not only the 17 from 171 but also the 172 controls, and so that'll be a little bit more stringent. So the companies that have implemented only the base of 171 will have to go back and kind of do a gap analysis and identify where they've got to come in and meet those updated 172 guidance. But that, again, it's all data driven, right? So for a level 1 system, it's going to be a system that's only handling federal contract information, not CUI. Then again, it is at the discretion of the DoD or the contracting office, so they can kind of play with the levels a little bit if they're clever and creative. But really, level 1's intended for the organizations that are only handling FCI. Level 2 is going to be CUI, your controlled unclassified information, and then level 3 is going to be CUI plus a lot those more sensitive cases of national security interest and highly sensitive data.
Yeah, a couple of changes we saw here too. You may remember from 1.0, the level 1 was called basic, level 3 was good, and level 5 was advanced. Good is not good for the federal government, so they've changed the parlance here a little bit to be foundational, advanced, and expert. I suppose that's just marketing at the end of the day. Something else we should probably talk about here was the change in assessment models. Previously, under those 1, 3, and 5 levels, it was only a third-party assessment. Now the government's kind of clawed back and said, maybe we want to take and put our eyes on it, or potentially even for this lower level 1, it's a self-assessment.
Right. Yep. So it gives the organizations a little bit of breathing room if you're one of those lower sensitivity or lower impact providers, and basically for like you already mentioned, for level 1, it can be an annual self-assessment, and that's really big, because the companies that will fall into that level 1 category, the service providers falling in that level 1 category, may not be like you said before, they may not be your large, well-established companies with thousands of employees. They may be small businesses. They may be nascent startups that provide something that the DoD is really interested in and wants to get their foot into. But it was limiting their ability to contract some of these organizations because they required that third-party assessment. And so asking a small business to go engage a third party for what amounts to 17 control practices to store only FCI didn't really make sense.
And from a
And so
cost perspective
yeah,
too, right?
exactly. Yep. Yeah. For the businesses, the cost perspective didn't make sense. A lot of from the contract perspective, the dollar value of the contract didn't make sense for an organization to spend the money on a third party assessor for just storing FCI. So they went back and looked at that and reassessed what the risk is to the DoD. Of allowing the self-assessment model, and they decided that it was acceptable. So that's a big change for the positive, especially because it stops excluding smaller businesses, nascent businesses, and very things with really cool but new products that the DoD wants to explore and modernize from being able to bid and compete on those RFIs and RFPs.
And I think it's commensurate with the risk, right? You know,
Mhm.
these lower level ones, they don't need a full outside assessor to come in and check it. The risk, even if things aren't operating correctly, is low. And so
Yep.
that aligns with it. But yeah, we'll talk about this in just a minute. But there are the three pals that are going to be coming in and assessing
Yep.
information from those third parties. Those organizations and companies that were going to be assessing the security controls on behalf of the federal government had a much larger role in CMMC 1.0. They've kind of been sidelined in terms of their approach here, really to the level 2 for those third party assessments. And so that definitely reduces their role in all of this. So that's an interesting change. Again, though, with probably 80% of companies falling in that middle tier, they're still going to have a lot of work to get out there and do, but it definitely reduces that impact for them. For those smaller companies that
Yeah.
are in the defense industrial base, yeah, you have to go and contract with one of these companies to come in and do that assessment. So, you know, there's much more dollars flying around as a result. I think it makes sense for this approach.
Yeah. It
You know,
does.
I suppose it does at the end of the day. There's a potential that there's some increased risk in that self attestation idea, right? For
Mhm.
level 1 and for select programs at level 2. But I think the hope would be that there's enough oversight from the CMMC accreditation body that they're assessing the right companies and
Yep.
assigning the right risk levels for them. And so those self assessments are given for companies that do have lower risk. Those third party assessments are being hit for companies that have more risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when you start talking about level 2, so there's the ability for DoD acquisitions management to kind of make a judgment call based on the level of risk in the data and sensitivity of that data. And even at level 2, you could potentially be only required to do an annual self-assessment. Otherwise, you'll end up falling into the triennial, the every 3 year 3POW independent assessment. That is also the requirement of level 3. So it gives some reprieve for those that fall in that level 2 category as well.
So I think probably at this point, you know, now that they've kind of got CMMC 2.0 out there or 2.0 out there, and maybe there's some amendments that come out with 2.1, most likely, you know, we're probably guessing that's the clarification around what the level 3 means. They might update the assessment frequency or kind of change the practices that are based on it. But generally, that's probably where we're expecting that 2.1 impact to hit.
Yep.
So if I'm a company who works in the defense industrial base, I directly contract with the federal government. Where am I starting in this process? You know, how do I know what I need to do, and where do I kind of align myself to get ready for this, knowing that compliance is coming?
Yeah. So what I would do is initially I just take a look at the data that you're storing on behalf of the government. Kind of do your own self-assessment initially and see, are you storing FCI? Are you storing CUI? Is it something that has a national security interest? And try to categorize yourself initially, and then set that baseline and try to go for the scope of controls that you can identify relevant to that. So whether that's just the 17 control practices from the level 1 what is it, foundational base, or if it's the 130 or so NIST 171 controls from the advanced base level 2, then kind of develop that baseline for yourself and start you know doing your readiness activities. Perform a gap analysis, see what you guys are meeting, what you aren't meeting. If you've already reached NIST 171 compliance, maybe just run through again and just verify the control implementations, the effectiveness of those controls, and give yourself kind of a readiness approach. Now, the requirements for CMMC 2.0 won't be included, other than some of the pilots that are going on right now, won't be included in any contracting until the official rulemaking process the DoD has is completed and it's codified. So once that happens, then you'll start seeing the contracting language either be updated with renewals or for new RFIs, new RFPs, new contracting language coming out that includes the DFAR clauses and DFARS clauses and the CMMC requirements. But until then, you are not necessarily on the hook for the CMMC certification, which, you know, like you said, you want to start preparing for it, but you're not. There's nothing that you can do right now to demonstrate.
What definitely after we kind of do that preparation side, what is my next step, right? Do I need to go out and contract with one of these organizations that's going to come in as an assessor? Do I need to start talking to people? Or is that something we just need to wait till it's officially published and rolled out?
You can start right now. I believe you can actually go to the CMMC's website. They have a list of authorized third-party assessment organizations, and once I'd have to look back. I'm not sure if it's you can get the certification. I'm not sure if they've rolled out the certification program or if you can do the assessment and kind of hold onto the result to submit for certification. But I'd have to check on that. But I'm pretty sure you can go out and get yourself a third-party assessment if you wanted to right now. What I would do is probably start with the readiness activities first, since the requirement isn't there yet, and then once the requirement is there, then engage the third-party assessment organization when you've had a chance to remediate any gaps or weaknesses that you found in that gap analysis or those readiness activities, and get your security posture up to the level that it needs to be for that CMMC level.
Yeah. And we post that in the chat there for the accreditation boundary website. Those C3PAOs, companies that have become certified assessors, you can find more information about them there. Yeah, a lot of those companies, their role is to come in and do that assessment on behalf of the government. Due to the fact that it is a compliance and audit-based approach, those same companies actually cannot help you, or rather the same people cannot help you go through the preparation process. And so that's where you have to differentiate. Right. So your C3PO will be different, most likely, from if you hire an outside company to get some support in terms of getting ready and getting prepared for this process.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Don't confuse the C3PAO with like a FedRAMP 3PAO. I always want to say C3PO. There are specific CMMC authorized C3POs that you've got to engage with. C3PAOs that you've got to engage with. So definitely take a look at. Alex, I don't know if you've got that link handy, but I can drop it in the chat. It's on CMMCAB.org.
Yep, just drop that in the chat there.
Great. Yep, and that's where you can go to find all the information you need on the assessors, also on the certification. But also, if you're an outside organization looking to perform assessments or to support assessments, let's say you're doing your annual self-assessment, you need to have certified assessors in your organization to be able to do that. This gives you all the information. That'll give you all the information you need to get those people certified, either as a certified assessor or as a certified professional, and they can still support assessments. They just can't lead them. So there's got all the information that you need at that link to be able to one, determine who can assess you, two, who you need in your organization if you're trying to do a self-assessment to be certified with either that assessor certification or the professional certification, and then the schedules, the schedules of assessments. So it's got all the information you need right there.
Yeah. I suppose a good question is, for those companies who are subcontractors to primes, so if you're a prime, you're the one who's directly working with the federal government. If you're a subcontractor to a company, do you have to meet the CMMC requirements, or does it manage through some other program or a third-party risk management? What does that generally look like?
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to the FedRAMP scenario there. So if you are providing services to a CMMC authorized defense industrial base contractor, it's highly likely that in contracting that contractor will place security terms in the contract for you that either require you to be CMMC authorized, CMMC certified yourself, or implement a level of control that would be commensurate with a CMMC certification. So the contracting organization can either leverage previously certified CMMC subcontractors, and they can go to the marketplace just like in FedRAMP and find those, or they can put them through their own third-party risk management processes. And by third-party risk management processes, we basically mean the diligence process where you've established a baseline of control that your subcontractor needs to meet, which is hopefully the same level of CMMC control that you need to meet. And then you are verifying that state of control. So you are either doing your own third-party risk assessment or third-party audit of those controls to make sure your subcontractor is meeting those before you onboard them, and then periodically thereafter.
That's probably a good point for the subcontractors. It's probably worth reaching out to your primes and saying, hey, what are going to be your expectations around CMMC? And they may say it's to meet the specific level requirements. So at level 2, it might be everything that's in 800-171. So as a subcontractor, it would behoove you to go ahead and get going on those and make sure you at least meet them. Now, the question is, do you want to become officially CMMC certified or not at that point if you've already gone through all of the legwork? The answer might be yes. You as a subcontractor, though not required, might still just want to go through the process so that you could be a prime. But it might also be that your prime requires you to be certified. So that would definitely be something we'd recommend is start that conversation early, talk to your prime, see what their expectations are going to be around the management of this, and make sure that you're getting ready as well. You may not be able to explicitly inherit all of their controls or their protections under their CMMC certification. So reach out and have that conversation right away.
Yeah, the other thing too, it's very much another follow the data exercise. So contracting organizations don't necessarily need to impose the CMMC level of control on their third-party providers, their subcontractors, unless the data that the subcontractor will be handling, storing, processing, transmitting on their behalf includes the data that warrants the CMMC certification for the contractor. Very similar to FedRAMP. So if you have a service provider that's not touching any federal data, you don't need to enforce the FedRAMP level of control, the FedRAMP low, moderate, or high level of control on that subcontractor. If they have access to systems, if it's like a development contractor or it's an infrastructure or IT support contractor, and they have access to the systems that store that data, even though it's in your environment, then they do have to be to meet that level, the CMMC level of control. But if they're not touching or don't have access to that DoD data, then it's something where the contracting organization can make a judgment call.
Yep, as a good point. So kind of going through and making all of those pieces happen and ultimately moving through this process, I think that brings up the question of kind of what is the best approach in terms of getting ready for this. From our side, we have a methodology that we like to follow in terms of that. But Andrew, maybe talk us through this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's similar to other audit readiness exercises. You're going to want to start with your planning and preparation phase. So kind of identifying the controls, like we said before, kind of taking a look at your own environment, the data you're supporting, and trying to either determine what level you would need to authorize that for CMMC certification, or if you do already have a solicitation that happens to have that level defined in there, referring to that and selecting the controls based on what the DoD has prescribed. Then move into like your information gathering phase, seeing what you guys have already in place, assessing the controls based on the baselines that you've got available to you, and then really kind of doing that gap analysis. So moving into that gap analysis, analyzing your gaps and weaknesses, identifying areas for improvement, and developing your remediation plans. Then designing those controls for any remediation that you have and implementing them, and making sure that they're effectively implemented and repeatable, because that's huge. A lot of people just kind of go through the exercise of implementing a control and forgetting about it, but making sure it's a repeatable, measurable process, and then validating that implementation and demonstrating that you validated and verified it before you get to that C3PAO that assessment. Once you get to that assessment, whatever they find, it becomes a POEM anyway, and you've got to deal with it then. But so if you're doing the work up front,
plan of actions,
milestone. Yep, exactly.
Your remediation plans.
Exactly, your remediation plan. So it becomes a gap in a POEM that you've got to track and remediate anyway. So getting the head start and doing that up front with readiness is probably the best approach. This way here you kind of minimize the work you have to do on the back end of that C3PAO assessment.
And I'll say too,
Yeah.
kind of going back to when you're talking about the gaps there, the idea here is right where helping you identify the gaps that exist between what your current processes do and what the requirements are from
Right.
CMMC. It might be that your current processes meet those requirements, so there's no gap, or they may require just a little bit of tweaking. But one of the big things to always understand from the gap perspective is that the difference, that delta, that gap between what you're doing and what needs to be done isn't always something that's necessarily costly or has a huge impact. It might just be turning on multi-factor authentication on your email. Maybe you didn't have it before, but just turning that on, something you already pay for if you're leveraging services like Office 365 or Google, that's a quick fix. And now you've actually met that. So there was no extra cost involved. There's no extra real legwork involved, and maybe just a little bit of training for everyone to understand how to use that moving forward. But it's not always something major or massive. There may be other areas where you look at reworking business processes, things that may have been done manually and ad hoc, maybe need to be done a little bit more automated. And so that's where kind of those implementing those remediations and making sure that it's repeatable and continuously works, not just something that's a point in time.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. From there, we've talked through a bunch of different details in all of this, and I think there's a number of different ways to kind of approach this. From our side, we generally recommend getting started on this early, understanding what your impact is going to be, especially if there are larger processes or problems. You don't want those to hold up your ability to continue to work with the federal government, especially as CMMC 2.0 or 2.1 starts to get legs. Those are going to start to be contractual requirements. So they could impact your ability to continue working with the federal government. Getting ahead on this is going to be the best approach. One of our top recommendations is really find a trusted advisor, get somebody in who can help you kind of understand the requirements and work with you on it. But make sure that whoever you do bring in, that they understand an approach that fits your size. Like we said, this is not a one-size-fits-all program in terms of the requirements. And they should be scaled appropriately. So if your company is smaller, then your requirements and doing that gap analysis and what maybe needs to be remediated is going to be much less than maybe a Fortune 500 company who has more interconnections and pieces and things they need to think through. So make sure you find someone who can help you scale that appropriately. To that end, and to make sure that you can get some help in all the right places, we recently have published a white paper that helps you understand the CMMC model. Talks through CMMC 1.0, the history of the program, helps you understand the different levels, and gives some tacit examples about what it means to be working under this program.
Yeah, one thing I did want to go back and mention, because we did mention the POAMs, and that was another sticking point with CMMC 1.0, is CMMC 1.0 didn't allow for any POAMs. And in reassessing that framework, I believe POAMs are actually allowed under, I believe, levels 1 and 2. I'd have to check on 3, but they will allow time-bound POAMs. So you can't have a POAM existing in perpetuity, but for like a 180-day or 60-day or a 30-day remediation, those will be an option, as well as the availability of risk waivers, which would require the authorizing government program office official to sign off on. And those previously weren't something that were possible in 1.0 that are possible or will be possible when it's finalized in 2.0. The other thing I did want to quickly mention before we kind of move on is the reciprocity with FedRAMP. There is intended to be a formal reciprocity with FedRAMP. So if you are a FedRAMP authorized provider, there is a path to CMMC certification without adding additional bells and whistles. Basically, there's a crosswalk, and that exists for level 1 and level 2 right now, but for level 3, that hasn't been formalized yet. So we're still waiting for a little bit more information on how that reciprocity will look and the mapping between the FedRAMP impact levels and the CMMC levels.
That's a great point. It comes back to the government trying to find that more flexible approach and scalable approach to CMMC 2.0. How can we find ways to accept risk or accept processes that exist that don't add any extra risk? Again, you as a company don't have the ability to accept that risk, but presenting your case about maybe why something is done the way it's done, maybe why that's a low risk, and while it may not meet the exact letter of the law of the requirements from CMMC, maybe why that's acceptable. understanding how to tell and sell that initiative is a little bit more of an art than a science. So again, make sure you find a trusted advisor who can help you through with that process and navigate that part. You don't just want to present your case and say, this is how it is. It's definitely a little bit of gamesmanship in terms of how to make that work and tell that story to potentially get that risk acceptance from the federal government. In here as well, we just posted the link in the chat here. You can go and download this white paper. You'll see some of these graphs that we covered today, or rather these tables. We'll talk through some of the practices, what they mean, what those requirements, how they've changed, and answer some of the most burning questions you may have about the processes, those you might be working with, and ultimately talk about some of the approach in terms of moving through it. So definitely go take a look at this. Again, you can find this on our website at the link we just posted in the chat here. It has a bunch of great information for you to walk through this process and really understand what CMMC is going to mean for you and your company. Andrew, any closing thoughts about CMMC 2.0 and what we can expect here in the next couple months as companies start to take this on and focus on it?
Only kind of what we've already mentioned before is start looking at it today, because before you know it'll be here, and the requirements will be working their way into contracts, and then you'll be on the hook for it officially. So start the legwork now and cut down on the redundancy and some of the headaches later on.
Yep, I think that's the best thing that we can say is start on this early. It doesn't have to be a huge heartburn. It's a compliance program like any other compliance program, but a lot of them are actionable approaches. Again, these are based off of programs from NIST, who have generally been recognized as developing security controls that are actionable and actually help reduce risk. So if you'd like to reduce the risk to your company, then this is a big boon. It's not just doing things for the sake of doing them, but you can actually reduce your risk for cybercrime and hackers as well. That's a great opportunity for you to take advantage of reducing the risk around cybersecurity incidents for your company. So that's the nice part, is you're not just doing compliance for compliance, but you're actually helping to reduce the risk for your company from a cyber attack. For a lot of smaller companies who may not have taken on initiatives like this before, that's a great starting point, and especially to have it in an easy and concise framework, something that you can also hold yourself accountable to and get assessed against. You've got a great chance to find some expert opinions to make that impact and, like I said, reduce that risk. I'm excited about where this is going. I don't know when CMMC 2.1 will come out, but like we said, we're going to guess it's kind of some clarification on level 3. The CMMC group has some regular town halls about this. If you've not subscribed to those, you can sign in and log into their email chain and get added to that group. They'll send out some usually monthly town halls where they talk about the latest on CMMC, how things are changing and growing, and also give the opportunity for questions to be asked. So if you're a company who's trying to identify, am I going to be part of this program, and how do I navigate these requirements, that's a great opportunity to do so. So we recommend you go there. Again, if you have any questions about the program or your implementation, you're always welcome to reach out to us here at Hive Systems. You can find us again online at www.hivesystems.io. With that, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for joining us to learn more about CMMC. Hopefully you found it interesting and got a little bit from the history side, but also how it may impact you and your company. We've provided a number of resources there in the chat for you to go and explore and download all of the great content, both from CMMC, but also from us with our white paper about it. As always, our experts here at Hive Systems can help make your cybersecurity journey more approachable. So please reach out again online at our website at www.hivesystems.io. Before we go, make sure you sign up for our next event. You can go online to our website, www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Next month, we're going to be talking with Corey Neske, our quantitative risk expert. We'll be talking through some great new topics about the future of cybersecurity, so make sure that you tune in. Again, make sure you sign up online and follow us here on YouTube at www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react. Thank you very much, and talk to you again soon.